Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, Episode 546, Center of the Cyclone, by Dr. John C. Lilly. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with For the Good of All. Here, I look at how government benefits for the poorest amongst us can trickle up and benefit everybody as far as the economy goes. Then, it's on to Center of the Cyclone by Dr. John C. Lilly. This book, which is over 50 years old, deals with the nature of consciousness and altered and isolated states, including isolation tanks and use of LSD. Today's show will feature background footage from Mount Mitchell. To get there from Asheville, North Carolina, take the Blue Ridge Parkway north and then turn left onto Highway 128. At the end of the road, you park and you hike the trail towards the summit. Here, I went off on the Mountains to Sea Trail to the north, as well as the Mountains to Sea Trail to the south. Well, once again, I have Squeaks with me. So, now, let's continue with For the Good of All. All this money that you give to the poor people, you might say, oh, it's so awful to give them more money, and especially to give them a lot more money. But the more money you give them, the more money they're going to spend. And that money's going to come right up to the ultra wealthy. And they'll make more money, have more money, and have more money to pay the taxes. Sure. And so it kind of feeds on itself. The rich get richer, they have more money to pay taxes. That provides more money for the poor people, and then they spend more money. Okay, let's cut off the spigot. Let's go back to the trickle-down theory. Okay, so the wealthy have all this money, and they don't want to pay taxes. They want to hold on to it, and somehow it's going to come down to us. Meanwhile, government benefits are being cut for the poorest amongst us. Less food stamps, less Social Security benefits, less money for Medicaid, etc. Well, you get the idea. Suddenly there's less money for Medicaid, and thus the poorest amongst us might have to pay more in medical bills. Well, they don't have any money left to spend on anything. And that's the end of that. So you multiply that by all these thousands and thousands, if not millions, of poor people. People who are in marginal, maybe not even poor, but maybe, quote, middle class, but still barely scraping by because their wages can't keep up with inflation and they don't have extra money to spend. Well, now these ultra-rich corporations aren't making as much money because people aren't spending money. Now they don't have as much money to pay in taxes. And so there's less income coming to the government, which means less money going out for benefits for poor people and so on and so on. So the trickle-down theory is a nightmare. The trickle-up theory is the solution. There. Whew. You got it? Did we make it through? Okay, now the last part. Who's ever in charge of all of this and making sure that the poor people really get their benefits and the rich people are really taxed? That's their mission. We elect someone who has a mission. We don't elect a person for their personality or other reasons. We elect them for that mission. If they deviate from their mission, if they start to fail, we make sure it's easy to remove them from power. And in fact, before they even are sworn in, they should freely recognize and admit that they are willing to give up all of their power instantly if they don't fulfill the mission and be replaced by someone who does. Well then, the ultra wealthy will scoff and say something like, well, you know what's going to happen. People are going to get really bored with this. Rich people aren't going to want to work for the government. The smartest amongst us know they're only going to be working for 2 weeks or whatever. And as soon as they start to fail, which is inevitable because of corporate influence on politics and unlimited donations or whatever, we have to get rid of corporate influence on politics. But anyway, they'll quickly fail and they'll quickly be replaced, so they don't want to do it. Well, fine. We'll get quote grandma to do it. We'll get some person who doesn't have that education, but who is poor and liberal. Then we'll build him or her up with the free, finest education. We'll do that to lots of poor people. Give them free, really good education in, things like law and economics and government policy. Then when we get enough of them ready, we'll start firing them and not firing them, but hiring them into the best government positions. And then they could be our government officials. And the other ones, the old guard, the people who favored the ultra wealthy, well, they can retire, I guess, like me. And because I turned 65, but anyway, and they could do that, and more liberal people could be in charge. There. Can we move on? Yes, finally. Okay, so what else are we going to do for the good of all? Well, we need adequate health care for all, including dental, vision, and mental health. Well, if the rich pay a little more money and the government doles out a little more money for things like that instead of for ultra-wealthy defense contractors, if the poor people get more money for dental and vision and mental health, and I'm talking about from the federal government, not administered by some Medicare Part C company that is really making a profit. We need healthcare to be non-profit, administered by the government, the federal government taking care of dental, vision, and mental health for us. And that way, poor people have a little more money to spend. And you know where that money goes. It trickles on up to the wealthy corporations. Remember, trickle up, not trickle down. Moving along. And if you're unsure if it works, talk to a liberal economist. Moving along. More quality, affordable housing. Notice I emphasize quality and affordable. Of course, wealthy people are probably opposed to this too. Strong headwinds again. Well, yeah, I guess if poor people pay more in rent, then everyone else pays more in rent. So we can't have people paying less rent because then everyone else is going to pay less rent. And the landlords will make less money. Well, phooey on that. We really should pay less rent. We have someone negotiate between the landlords and their profits and how much poor people can afford, and we'll have a true, fair answer. We're going to really hear all the voices and come up with the right solutions. And as soon as who's ever in charge deviates from the correct solution and starts favoring the wealthy landlords more, they'll get rid of him or her and have someone who can properly balance everything. So the wealthy landlords make a little money, but the poor people can afford to pay their rent. Then we move on to better environmental policy. Of course, the rich polluters, these ultra wealthy corporations, don't want to spend a lot of money on environmental safeguards, but gee, it will be worth it for all of us. Cleaner air and cleaner water. And often, industrial sites are located in, oh, you guessed it, poor neighborhoods. And so they suffer a little bit more or a lot more from the poor water quality and the polluted air. But we need to have better environmental policy because that polluted air drifts over to the rich section of town. And eventually we all might be drinking the polluted water. So come on, get a grip. We need a better environment for the sake of all of us. And it's going to cost the wealthy more, and they're going to really fight it. But we need to fight back. Gee, we're fighting hard. Well, of course, the best way to fight is to vote for a liberal Democrat on any elected office you could think of, but particularly state and federal offices. We need the liberals in charge. We need to reduce wealth concentration. Seriously, if it gets much worse, we may not be able to afford to survive. Then there's going to be no money left. And only a few people will have a lot of money. And they'll be, quote, in control of us. No, we need our freedom. And to get our freedom, the best way to get more freedom is to have more money and to have a fair government and to support people who support more freedom, which often is the liberal Democrats. But anyway, we need more freedom for all of us. And that means freedom of religion too, not just economic freedom. For instance, I believe in the imaginary territories that lie between us and God. So I guess I'm a Christian in a way too, but maybe Buddhist too, but whatever. We need to have freedom of religion. We need to be able to change your religion and still be accepted by society. We need to be able to adapt. As long as we're honorable people, it doesn't matter what religion we're from, as long as we do others good. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Moving along. But the golden rule is always a good place to start, obviously. And we need better education for us. Sure, we need better education in math, science, vocabulary, law, medicine, environmental policy, and more. Languages, even the arts and music, sports. We need better education from all that. Mental, physical education, and all sorts of education. But particularly things like math, science, logic, law, economics. Sure, we all need to have a little bit better education so we can understand things better. And, together we can solve it if we just get on board and realize that what I'm talking about is real. And all of this is supported. All of what I've been discussing, of course, would be supported by the East Side imaginary territory that I'm associated with, because they always want to lift up the poor and benefit the poor and have people have more freedom of ideas, expressions, of freedom of ideas and freedom of expression and so on and so on. So we look for ways to improve things for the good of all. Now it is time for Center of the Cyclone by Dr. John C. Lilly. This book, published in the early 70s, deals with the nature of consciousness and altered states of consciousness and experiments in isolation tanks. Some of these experiments include the use of LSD. So, this book is very interesting and deals with, well, something I'm interested in, the nature of consciousness. So now, let's go to page 10 of Center of the Cyclone by Dr. John C. Lilly. After 10 years of work in the isolation tank, I had made a generalization from my experiences in the tank. Let me state this as simply as possible. What one believes to be true either is true or becomes true in one's mind, within limits to be determined experimentally or experientially. These limits are beliefs to be transcended. This is a situation when one is freed up from one's environment, from one's surrounding reality, and all of the usual forms and patterns of stimulation are attenuated to the minimal possible level. Now, let's go to page 14, continuing on to page 15. I had other experiences 4 times when I was close to death, which had said, this is not all there is. Continuing my integration and exploration of the second day, I went back into one of the close to death experiences. As a Catholic child, I was exposed to death. When a relative would die, we had to view the body, attend the funeral, and go through the usual Catholic rituals having to do with death. I was thoroughly acquainted with the concept of the soul leaving the body of the person at the time of death. Also, I had imagined, in the privacy of my own bed as a little boy, my soul taking off and winging towards God and towards heaven. This also turned out to be a preparation for that first LSD session when I was listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. I literally left my body and went to heaven, just as I had wished to do and had done in dream states as a little boy. I kept reminding myself, in the province of the mind, what one believes to be true either is true or becomes true within limits to be found experientially. So, later, I was to realize that the limits of one's own beliefs sets the limits of the experiences. At the limits of one's creative imagination, whatever that is, there are a set of beliefs yet to be transcended. The learning process is on a vast scale. Now, let's go to page 25 of Center of the Cyclone by Dr. John C. Lilly. Their magnificent, deep, powerful love overwhelms me to a certain extent, but I finally accept it. As they move closer, I find less and less of me and more of them in my being. They stop at a critical distance and say to me that at this time I have developed only to a point where I could stand their presence at this particular distance. If they come any closer, they would overwhelm me and I would lose myself as a cognitive entity, merging with them. They further say that I separated them into two because that is my way of perceiving them, but that in reality they are only in the space in which I found myself. They say that I insist on still being an individual, forcing a projection onto them, as if they were two. They further communicate to me that if I go back to my body, as I developed further, I would eventually perceive the oneness of them and of me, and of many others. They say that they are my guardians, that they have been with me before at critical times, and that in fact they are with me always, but that I am not usually in a state to perceive them. I am in a state to perceive them when I am close to the death of the body. In this state, there is no time. There is an immediate perception of the past, present, and future, as if in the present moment. Now, let's go to page 42, continuing on to page 43. I quickly found that my body had different densities, that my legs and my head tended to sink. This meant devising supports from an extremely smooth, fine rubber dam used in surgery to maintain my foot position in the tank without touching the bottom. The head balance was adjusted by allowing a certain amount of air to be in the head mask. After a good deal of such technical matters, I was finally able to reach a state of suspended neutral buoyancy just below the surface of the water of the tank. Later, such experiences and experiments were called sensory deprivation. At no time did I find any deprivation effect. In the absence of all stimulation, it was found that one quickly makes up for this by an extremely heightened awareness and increasing sensory experience and the absence of known means of external stimulation. Within the first few hours, it was found that I did not tend to go to sleep at all. The original theory was wrong. One did not need external stimulation to stay awake. After a few tens of hours of experiences, I found phenomena that had been previously described in various literatures. I went through dreamlike states, trance-like states, mystical states. In all of these states, I was totally intact, centered, and there. At no time did I lose conscious awareness of the facts of the experiment. Some part of me always knew that I was suspended in water in a tank, in the dark, and in the silence. Now, let's go to page 48, continuing on to page 49 of Center of the Cyclone by Dr. John C. Lilly. In the first tank experiment with LSD, the first space I moved into was completely black, completely silent, empty space without a body. The blackness stretched out to infinity in all directions. This silence extended out to infinity in all directions, and I remained centered at a single point of consciousness and of feeling. There was literally nothing in the universe but my center, myself, and the blackness and the deep silence. In a shorthand way, I call this the absolute 0 point. This became a reference point to which I could return in case things got too chaotic or too stimulating in other spaces. This was the central core of me, my essence in a universe with no stars, no galaxies, no entities, no people, no other intelligences. This was my safe place. Later on page 49, I wish to emphasize that the 0 point was not in the body. It was out in a universe of nothing except silence and blackness. It was defined as out of the body, out of the universe as we know it. As I was to learn later, the illusion of blackness in silence meant that I was still holding on to the usual cognition spaces of the body. I was still holding on to the idea of blackness, the idea of silence, the idea of a central point of identity and consciousness. Later, this was found to be unnecessary, except during extreme states when I needed a rest. At those times, I would return to the 0 point. Now, let's go to Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.